In 1799, a man in London unknowingly made history by accidentally serving his family the flesh of a god. Shortly after dinner, the man, his wife, and his children were admitted to a hospital in a panic. They had been haunted by crazy visions. The man's son kept laughing, and no matter how they tried to calm him down, nothing worked. He was gripped by an almost holy kind of madness. But this wasn't possession, it was psilocybin. While foraging for mushrooms, the father had picked Psilocybe similanceata, a powerful hallucinogenic species now known as magic mushrooms or shrooms. He's believed to be one of the first recorded modern cases of shroom use in Europe. From Aztecs and Indigenous ceremonies to expanding the minds of hippies and treating veterans with PTSD, shrooms have cast a long shadow over human history. Today, we are firing up our trippy time machine and heading deep into the past to uncover just how long humans have been taking shrooms, and why these little brown toadstools might have played a mind-bending role in shaping humanity as we know it. Rather than starting at the very beginning, which was a ridiculously long time ago, we're kicking things off in the modern age of shroom culture. In the 2010s and 2020s, cutting-edge research in chemistry and neuroscience has shown that shrooms, when used in clinical settings, can do more than just cause hallucinations. They can stimulate the release of powerful reward chemicals, and even more impressively, they can increase neural connectivity between different parts of the brain. This has shown promise in treating a whole host of mental illnesses that are notoriously tough to tackle, like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. But back in the 1990s, the academic communities of Europe and the United States were struggling with both figuring out the mysteries of these unique mushrooms and the legal tribulations of working scientifically with psychedelics. Psilocybin can be produced by over 200 different kinds of fungi, and it lives in the same family of serotonergic psychedelics as mescaline and LSD, the hippies' favorite. Psilocybin mushrooms have also been documented growing in basically every ecological environment that wasn't Antarctica. So it's no surprise that human run-ins with the freaky fungi have been common in so many time periods and cultures across history. They've also been around for approximately 67 million years. That means our earliest records of them start at around the time when dinosaurs were wiped out, compared to the approximate 160,000 years of the modern Homo sapien. The most important figure in 1900s magic mushroom history was an American banking executive and mycologist. That's the study of fungi, by the way, named R. Gordon Wassan. In the 1950s, Wassan traveled to the remote town of Huejutla de Jimenez in Oaxaca, Mexico. There, he became the first ever English speaker to take part in a sacred Didzito psychedelic ceremony with indigenous Aztec people of the area. He found it to be a fascinating, transformative experience and something that, if repackaged, might be able to change Western medicine forever. He even documented all of this in a 1957 photo essay for Life magazine called Seeking the Magic Mushroom, spreading the good word to the masses in the West for the first time. And Wassan wasn't the only one chasing the mysteries of magic mushrooms. Over in Switzerland, a Sandoz Pharmaceuticals chemist named Albert Hoffman, already famous for discovering LSD, was making a discovery of his own. He successfully isolated psilocybin from Psilocybe mexicana mushrooms, identifying it as the key chemical behind their powerful psychedelic effects. Then he went a step further, formulating it into a pill that could be used in tests within a clinical setting. Without the work of Wassan and Hoffman, we wouldn't have any of the more advanced research we have into the science and potential of magic mushrooms that we have today. The torch of their work was carried on into the 1960s. Researchers began exploring the medical applications of psilocybin and other psychedelics, with Harvard University becoming one of the most active hubs in the United States. A lot of the most famous research there was being conducted by Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. Rich eccentrics were also doing their own kinds of independent research at the time. Mazatec shamans, keeping the old traditions alive in Huejutla de Jimenez, found themselves getting extremely high-profile visitors who were eager to take part in the mushroom rituals, including music legends John Lennon and Bob Dylan. Most of these pilgrims came to meet with Curandera Maria Sabina, the holy woman who had assisted Wassan in his initial research, on the proviso that he maintained her anonymity. Sadly, Wassan broke this promise, not only getting Sabina lots of interested customers, but also plenty of negative attention too. This resulted in horrifying consequences, like the burning down of her home or the murder of her son in retribution for performing rites that some deemed ungodly. Curandera, by the way, is a ceremonial role in the Mazatec faith, which roughly equates to the idea of a healer or a shaman. And then there was a huge roadblock in the 1970s as free-loving flower children protested the Vietnam War, President Richard Nixon declared a war on drugs. This made magic mushrooms a highly forbidden Schedule I substance under the American Drug Enforcement Agency. Draconian drug laws remain one of the biggest obstacles to magic mushroom research today, threatening to shut down progress before it even begins. So let's steer clear of all that for now. Let's head even further into the past, long before the modern scientists in lab coats ever got their sanitized hands on psilocybin. Of course, there was that unnamed English family in 1799 who were accidentally launched into a full-blown trip after dear old dad tossed some magic mushrooms into their stew pot. But even before that, it's likely that professional botanists in the 17th century had already crossed paths with these mysterious fungi. They may not have fully understood what they were dealing with, but the strange effects of these little mushrooms didn't go unnoticed. The famous English herbalist John Parkinson wrote about the foolish mushroom in his 1640 book, Theatricum Botanicum. In Hungary, magic mushrooms weren't just sprouting in the wild, they were being cultivated. Used in love potions by rural communities, their effects were well known, even if not fully understood. The Flemish botanist Carolus Clusius took note of the phenomenon, naming the fungi Borland gomba, or crazy mushroom. A pattern starting to form here. While we don't have definitive scientific proof that these were for certain psilocybin mushrooms, plenty of circumstantial evidence seems to point in that direction. But while records of shroom use in Europe during this period were a bit patchy, the 1500s brought a surprising surge of information from across the Atlantic. The surprising source was a Franciscan friar named Bernardino de Sahagún. After the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, Sahagún became obsessed with documenting their rituals, beliefs, and cultural practices, including their use of psychedelic mushrooms in religious ceremonies. He recorded the details of an authentic Aztec mushroom ceremony in the 1520s. In the 16th century, Dominican friar Diego Duran also did his own research into the matter. He said of people who consumed the mushrooms, quote, "Those who eat them see visions and feel a fluttering of the heart. The visions they see are sometimes frightening and sometimes humorous. Those few who eat them in excess are driven to lust." Incidentally, Spanish missionaries attempted to wipe out all traces of the mushroom ceremonies carried out by the Aztecs, deeming them heretical. But it was the writings of clergymen like Sahagún and Diego Duran, despite their clear bias against the Aztecs, that laid the groundwork for future exploration. Those texts would inspire researchers like R. Gordon Wassan to carry out their own quests to discover more about the ancient ceremonies. In many of these sacred ceremonies, the Aztecs, swept up in wild visions, would sing, dance, embrace, laugh, and weep. It was an experience that resembled a modern-day music festival, but with a spiritual twist. The next morning, they'd get together and try to find meaning in their visions, interpreting what information the gods might have imparted to them during their altered state. The Aztecs, by the way, often referred to magic mushrooms as Teonanacat, or the flesh of the gods in English. But these ceremonies weren't all fun and games, despite the generally good vibes that these historical depictions tend to express. Many anthropologists, mycologists, and historians believe that there's a major obstacle to the widespread use of therapeutic shrooms today. And it's not scientific, it's cultural. The biggest barrier lies in the stark contrast between indigenous traditions and the modern-day Western world. Indigenous societies tend to be collective, using psilocybin in shared spiritual ceremonies. Meanwhile, modern Western culture is largely individualistic, focusing on personal experiences and solo healing. That fundamental disconnect may be one of the biggest challenges psychedelic therapy faces today. Dr. Yuria Seledwin, a senior fellow at the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California, Berkeley, captures the core of this cultural divide, speaking on how humanity's relationship with mushrooms has changed over time. She explains, "In most of these traditional cultures, we don't have that sense of division between what is human and the natural world. We believe we are always interacting with living when we use spirit medicines. We're looking for communication and to restore balance with that world." The reasoning for these differing approaches was also based on a fundamental difference of philosophy on the nature of sickness. In the modern world, when someone gets sick, it's seen as a personal problem. That individual is unwell, and that individual needs treatment. But in many indigenous collectivist cultures, sickness wasn't just a personal issue, it was a sign of something deeper. Illness was often viewed as a symptom of imbalance within the entire community. Psychedelic mushrooms weren't just medicine for the individual, they were a tool to dissolve the boundaries between people, to restore harmony, and to treat the community as a whole. People who tell you that psychedelics like shrooms make music better are also not far off in their interpretation. Music is believed to have played an extremely important role in a lot of Mesoamerican mushroom ceremonies. particularly singing, led by the shaman, and often a low, steady drum beat. The big difference is a matter of perspective. A modern-day person might suggest that the trip makes the music deeper, but an Aztec shaman, if you could bring one to the modern day for an interview, would likely say that the music enhanced the trip. According to Dr. Seligman, the real power of psychedelics lies in their ability to encourage bonds between people and communities as a part of a collective experience. But before we go even further into the crazy history of people and shrooms, and believe us, it does get a lot crazier than even this, we need to answer a quick question: how do magic mushrooms actually work? Why do they have such an incredible psychedelic effect on the brain? Let's take a little trip to the realm of chemistry and biology to find out. Almost all of the mushrooms we've discussed today fall under the umbrella of psilocybe, where the active compounds are psilocybin and psilocin. Each mushroom generally contains between 0.1 and 1.3% of these psychoactive chemicals. These chemicals enter the brain through the same receptors as serotonin, one of those reward chemicals we were alluding to earlier. Specifically, it's a neurotransmitter that regulates sexual desire, sleep, and positive emotional states. In most trips, the effects will kick in about 20 to 30 minutes after the mushrooms have first been ingested. This can be done by eating the mushrooms, consuming a clinical pill containing the active ingredients, or from brewing the mushrooms into a tea, which is popular in both ceremonial and recreational contexts. Once the effects have kicked in, you're in there for the long haul, as average trips last between 3 to 6 hours. Although the trip might subjectively feel longer or shorter than that to the tripper because of the time-dilating effect that some mushroom trips induce. By activating the brain's serotonin 5-HT2A receptors, specifically on the cortical pyramidal cells, the psilocybin alters the brain's metabolic activity. This shift opens the door for new and unusual neural connections to form, linking areas of the brain that don't typically communicate. In essence, it rewires your perception, sparking thoughts, sensations, and insights that the brain wouldn't have found on its own terms. A little later, we'll discuss how it actually feels to trip on mushrooms, but for now, let's get back to the history lesson. Most researchers believe the first written recordings of magic mushroom usage came from a pictorial book produced by the indigenous Mesoamerican Mixtec people, titled Codex Vindobonensis Mexicanus I. Among its many intriguing symbols, there were pictographs of mushroom-holding lizards clinging to the wind god's back, as well as people partaking in rituals while holding mushrooms. Doesn't take an expert in Mesoamerican archaeology to put 2 and 2 together on that one. In 2008, an expedition into the Bolivian Andes discovered a 1,000-year-old leather pouch made out of fox snouts, once owned by a shaman of the Tiwanaku civilization. It probably wouldn't have looked that much different to the confiscated personal effects of a drug user arrested in the modern day. In addition to paraphernalia like spoons and snuffing tubes, chemical analysis revealed trace amounts of cocaine, ayahuasca tea ingredients, and of course psilocybin. And the most insane part in the grand story of humanity's relationship with shrooms, this 1,000-year-old shaman's bag is actually still a pretty recent example. In many of the indigenous cultures that normalized hallucinogens like magic mushrooms in their daily practices, they referred to them not as psychedelics but as spirit medicine. Without the modern restrictions imposed by governments and legal systems, shrooms and other hallucinogens were once used freely across many aspects of life. The medicinal usages we're exploring today were only a small part of it. The drugs weren't just used for healing, they were tools for connection. They played a key role in community building, breaking down social barriers during special ceremonies so people could bond on a deeper, more human level. They expanded minds, eased the pain of dying, stimulated creativity, and were even just used for fun. But once again, this is far from some of the oldest records of people experimenting with shrooms. And just how far back it goes will blow your mind. In a Spanish cave, archaeologists found what's now known as the Selva Pascuala mural. This piece of post-Paleolithic cave art, which features symbols widely believed by academics to be psilocybin mushrooms, specifically Psilocybe hispanica, the cave painting is 6,000 years old, showing that shrooms were used in European religious practices for millennia. But even that doesn't actually even come close to some of the oldest evidence of the almost eternal love affair between humanity and magic mushrooms. 7,000 years ago, long before the unknown artist behind the Selva Pascuala mural ever existed, another ancient piece of mushroom history was etched into stone. In the Sahara Desert of North Africa, archaeologists discovered a rock mural showing ancient gatherers holding what many believe are mushrooms in their hands. The figures aren't just carrying them, they are celebrating them. But that is still not even close to being the oldest evidence of shroom use. Because an eye-watering 10,000 years ago, when woolly mammoths and saber-toothed smilodons were still wandering the plains, artists from the Sandawe and Bradshaw communities in ancient Australia were leaving their mark. They painted enigmatic mushroom-headed people, believed by some to be an abstract representation of someone undergoing a psilocybin vision journey. Having heard about the literal millennia that humans have been partaking in some variation of the mushroom ceremony, by now you might be wondering how it feels. What are the effects of the drug that hundreds of human cultures have revered as a sacrament over the course of shared history? Much like its synthetic cousin, LSD, magic mushrooms are a psychotropic drug. That means that they produce their effect by altering the operations of the central nervous system. But if you are picturing your field of vision being filled up with bizarre abstract images and hallucinations, or being transported to some weird fantasy world, we're sorry to tell you that you've been misled. In actual fact, rather than making you see things that aren't there, a mushroom trip distorts your perception of the things already around you and in front of you. This is why a common phrase in the mushroom community is set and setting. The energy you bring to your trip is the energy you get out of it. If you take mushrooms while feeling worried, angry, or anxious, there is a high chance you'll experience a bad trip, which can be an extremely distressing experience. Expect waves of paranoia, intense fear, overwhelming anxiety, and disturbing or unpleasant delusions. You can see why the shroom ceremonies of various indigenous cultures were such perfect arrangements for positive tripping. These experiences would be guided by experienced shamans and community affairs in places that the trippers found familiar. They would be surrounded by people they loved and cared about, while pleasing, familiar ceremonial music played. It's the kind of tripping scenario that most modern recreational mushroom users dream of, and why, again, so many casual users in the modern day like to take them at music festivals. During a mushroom trip, you're likely to experience distorted perceptions of time. It may appear to move slower, faster, or stop entirely. Sensory experiences can intensify, colors will feel more vivid, tastes and textures seem to have more depth and meaning, sounds and smells ring with a clarity they've never had before. Even thoughts and emotions appear more intense while in the mushroom tripping state, which is what can lead to feelings of communing with some deeper truth of the universe itself. This can be a profoundly awe-inspiring or comforting feeling in the right mindset, and a deeply unsettling one in the wrong mindset. In terms of the physical side effects that can accompany a shroom trip, though they'll vary from person to person and from dosage to dosage, you can often expect nausea, dizziness, numbness, weakness, and loss of appetite. Many people choose to smoke weed while taking mushrooms to take the edge off of the nausea, which is also why a lot of people going through chemotherapy also supplement their treatment with medical marijuana. Like marijuana, mushrooms are also one of those drugs that are extremely difficult to overdose on. There haven't been any documented cases of a death caused by shrooms. However, plenty of people have met tragic ends when foraging for what they thought were hallucinogenic fungi, and instead just ended up consuming one of the many varieties of highly poisonous mushrooms. A pretty nasty way to go. But back to the history lesson as we journey to the farthest documented case of shroom usage in all of human history. As we continue to speed back through centuries and millennia, we can even see that humans were using psychoactive mushrooms around 16,500 years ago, the middle of the Ice Age. In all likelihood, the pre-farming hunter-gatherer cultures of the time discovered magic mushrooms by accident while foraging for regular food. After feeling the incredible mind-altering effects, they started weaving them into religious rites and practices as a way of connecting with their idea of the infinite. The mushroom in question was Amanita muscaria, which got its first use cases in early America after humans crossed the Bering Strait between eastern Russia and Alaska. Despite almost 20,000 years of history elapsing since then, this mushroom is still used by the Ojibwa people in the Great Lakes region between Canada and the United States to this very day. If it ain't broke, don't fix it after all. There is widespread evidence for the use of mushrooms in an astounding number of indigenous cultures. In Mexico alone, there's the Chatins, Chinantecs, Matlazincs, Mazatecs, Miches, Nahuatl, Purépechas, Totonacs, and Zapotecs. And while magic mushrooms are illegal for recreational use in Mexico, the law still permits the use of shrooms by these groups on religious grounds as they are considered a sacrament. And in some countries like Jamaica, they are completely legal already. As attitudes shift and more countries begin re-examining their approach to psychedelics, researchers continue to explore the mind-expanding potential of these tiny toadstools. And one thing becomes clear: magic mushrooms may be small, but their impact on human history, culture, and consciousness is anything but. What do you think was the main reason people turned to magic mushrooms throughout history? Spiritual connection, community bonding, or just a trip? Let us know in the comments. Now check out Scientists Reveal How a Zombie Apocalypse Could Actually Happen, or watch this instead.